All right, hello everyone. I've got a different kind of video for you today. I am here with somebody new for this. I've got Darnish here. We've been speaking on Twitter or X for some time, and I think he's a very intelligent person who's been sharing some interesting threads, ideas, talking with me about tactics and things like that Ten Hag is doing, and some of the struggles and difficulties that we've been going through this season. So nice to have you here today. And yeah, I wanted to introduce you first before we get into it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to finally been doing this. To finally do this, we've been trying to do it for some time. But yeah, I am basically tactics is my bread and butter. I do a lot of work for Sky in terms of weekly analysis and what happens in games, why they happen, and then sort of putting everything into the context of the ripple effects of it all. But it's heavily to do with Man United. And I produce weekly threads as well, particularly on Manchester United in general. I spend my my nights, my 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. nights rewatching them. As sad as that sounds.
No, well, they're good threads, and it's I mean, it's good analysis, at
Thank
least
you.
from my perspective as a viewer, as a watcher of United, to look at it and sometimes say, yeah, this puts a lot of good imagery and perspective on what's going on, because I certainly know that as a very much being a layman in this, there's things I can see, but oftentimes there's a whole lot more I think you don't see in terms of good and bad, and what goes on the pitch, and sometimes it's nice to get a perspective of somebody kind of breaking it down in a way that's understandable. I think sometimes we're all looking for that.
Yeah, it's always striking to me how many things I missed the second time, because
Yep.
particularly the first time, it's I think we spend large portions of the game getting emotional about it or reacting to it, so we
Yep.
might miss certain
Yep.
sections of what's going on. And then, of course, you add in obviously you're looking online at the same time to see what everybody else thinks, and then you sort of formulate
Yep.
your opinion from that. But the second watch is like it's almost a new game sometimes.
Yeah, makes sense for sure. I can see that as well. Certainly, I don't like to rewatch games often because of the emotional response to those things. But from a
For sure.
tactical standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to look back at it through a different lens and say, okay, let me look. What happened here? What you kind of know, and you can look back at the whole lead up to something that occurs and say, okay, this is actually what's going on here. This is actually what's they're trying to do, and outside of the individual moments and things like that. But obviously one of the things we wanted to look at here, obviously in a general sense, is there's a lot of overhaul that's going to be coming with United. In recent videos and news out there and things that you've probably all been watching, obviously we know that there's going to be major changes at United when it comes down to when it comes down to the structure, the management of the club, all of that, and down to very likely as well, director of football. And one of the biggest things I think that it's always worth analyzing, at least to looking at how we play and style, and I'll ask you your opinions and questions and things like that, is United have very much for a long time lacked a cohesive, club-wide style of play where you can say, this is exactly how we want to play. We're moving things in the direction of playing that direction. We're buying players in that direction, and you stick with it, right? And every game, it's the same style. Every week, it's the same style. Every month, it's the same style. Year to year, it's the same
Yeah.
style progressing in that direction. Even with the same manager, we see it change 1 year to the next, 1 month to the next, where it's a constant kind of fight. And I think it's worth kind of looking into this, because with a new director in, one of the things I know that will happen, and one of the reasons they're looking at that director, is to say, we want a style, we want a way of playing, we want to decide it. It's something, I did a tweet on this with, Paul Mitchell had some quotes last year talking about this, even when they brought Erik ten Hag in, saying, he's a top coach, but they need a top blueprint, not only for now, but for the next 5 years, and work towards that. The consistency of decision-making will yield a good end result. Ralph Rangnick pointed this out about, the way that Liverpool, that City have done things where you start top down and say, this is what we want to do. This is our style. This is where we're going. And you align your manager, you align your play, you align your recruitment to that. And in the long term, it pays dividends. So I think for you, one of the questions I would have is, do we have a style? And what does that really mean in the first place? What would it mean to you? Do we have a style of play? And is it something that has any consistency, even this season, last season, overall?
You'd be astounded at the amount of times people have asked me that in the last 2 months. And my answer has been, last season, we'll start with last season. I think you need to start with last season and give it context, because we can't, obviously this season is where it is, but we cannot ignore the work that was done last year. And we also can't ignore how enamored and how happy we all were as people who watch Manchester United, and how not obviously the media coverage this season, as always with Man United, when it snowballs and it's holistically negative, It was actually quite positive last season. It was going to be. They were competent in a lot of. I think they only lost, was it 11 games out of 65? We'll have to check that, but I think it was roughly they only lost 11 games out of 65. So that is a team that was, especially in his first season, was definitely heading in the right direction. I think we all said that. In terms of a style of play, what it was is I always slotted every single game that we had into 3 categories, because football is always that. It's always repeat patterns. So as you see the same things, and then maybe the manager changes something, and then you see the causal effects of what they've changed, and then you see the ripple effects of that continue. I always boil it down to 3 sections. We had the 3-1-6. This was the possession-based style. Against your Bournemouths, your Nottingham Forests, your Evertons to some degree. This was last year. I say Everton in particular because that was the first time last year away, Casemiro's debut, where we were like, okay, we can maybe actually see some things here from Ten Hag football. And you're going, okay, I'm seeing it now. I'm seeing the fullback being wide whilst the winger is inverted, or vice versa. Maybe the winger goes outside and the fullback is inverted. They manipulate that space between the centre back and the fullback. In the half space, there's 3 at the back, there's 1 in midfield, and then there's 6 up front. And that was primarily what we used against teams that sit deep. I think the best instance of it that I've seen this season is, funnily enough, Copenhagen away, obviously before the Rashford red card, or the Palace Carabao Cup game. And this was good as well, and this is good when they do it, because the players will rotate. So like sometimes Eriksen will go into the 3, and a fullback like Dalot maybe will go into the 1. But it's the system stays the same, but the players they change, but the effect is still the same. So we had that, and we have that for some games this season. So that was what we did against deep teams last season. Then what he also utilized was obviously the transitions, and this was against big teams. This was, you sit deep, man to man in the middle of the pitch. So Ten Hag is basically said last season, and this was effective against Arsenal at home. This was effective against City at home. It was effective against Liverpool at home, particularly. These are just games off the top of my head. And it's the practice of, we are going to go man-to-man in the middle of the pitch, and we're going to stop you from playing through the center of the pitch, because that's the most dangerous area in a football game. I think Pep Guardiola said it 2 weeks ago. He said, if you can control the middle of the pitch, that is where you win the game. We'll give you a chance out wide, but we'll rather deal with that. We'll rather deal with the ball coming in, and Varane and Martinez can clear that. So that was what we did last season against big teams. And then the third category, and this is what has recently been happening with the 4 wins out of 5, which is, okay, things aren't necessarily working, but the momentum, which was through the roof last season, it was through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
Rashford was carrying the team, and Casemiro was playing out of his skin, and that is, the momentum is so high, and the spirit is so high, and the morale is so high. We're just going to get through it, and we'll 1-0 you, and then we can hold you at arm's
Yep.
length for the last 20 games, and then we'll move on and then go to the next one. So those are the 3 ways that I saw the style of play for last season. It gets more complicated this season because of injuries and because of different reactions to how the style of play is. So if we quickly go game by game, in the beginning, what I saw against Wolves and against Tottenham, and then to a certain degree against Forest, was we tried this new form of pressing, particularly against Wolves. We tried the pressing, and it led to a lot of turnovers. What it did do, though, is it left Man United open to transitional issues as well. You saw that first game, Matheus Cunha running through everybody in the middle of the pitch.
Yep.
So I think that's one thing that he tried this season that has clearly maybe gone because, I don't know, personnel issues, injuries, or just a reaction to the fact that he can't handle the transitional issues, which is strange because it was actually working, and it was actually something that was fruitful, and it's definitely something that you can try against the Burnley or Brentford or Sheffield
Let me
United.
ask you about that point on the transitions and the pressing, because one of the things I know is that United this year, I believe, are first in the league in recoveries in the opposition half, right? Yeah.
That's right.
And at the same time, we've given up way more goals, especially in transition, than before.
Yes.
And you have to think it kind of goes hand in hand, right? Like these are 2 sides of the same coin. Like you mentioned, we saw versus Wolves, it was really obvious. We were lucky not to concede multiple goals, that this pressing high, the gaps that were left in behind, especially in the midfield and other areas, were problematic. And do you think that is a personnel issue, or do you think that systemically this new way of pressing that has worked is not suitable to these kind of transitions? Because I know that one critique of Ten Hag at Ajax was defending in transitions, that it was always very open and in the Premier League you get punished a little bit more. Do you think it's systemic and it's trying to use numbers to make up for the lack of, do we press with more people than someone like, say, Liverpool? Why is there more gaps, in pressing high than someone like Liverpool or Arsenal or City that have a really strong counter press up in that opposition half?
I think it's maybe because they hadn't learned to press effectively yet.
Right.
I think that, okay, we'll talk about, it created a lot of turnovers, but then what happens when you don't win the ball? And the first game was case in point of this. They don't win the ball. All of a sudden, Casemiro dives in. You got 40 yards of free space, free reign.
Yeah.
Against Tottenham, the turnover still occurred, but the attack is at a level. I think we'll talk about the attack later. But the attack is at a level where it's just misfiring so poorly. It didn't make use of that. So I think it's systemic in the sense that they haven't learned to press as effectively as in terms of, when we say pressing, we say high press to win the ball back and to cause turnovers. But they didn't learn what to do in rest defense when they didn't turn over the ball, if that makes sense.
Right.
Also, I think a large reason has to do with the fact that last season, Casemiro was the guy who could be like, okay, but there's 40 yards of space there. Are we going to be okay? It's like, yeah, it's fine. Casemiro's there. He'll clean up. He'll do something. Don't worry about it. This season, it's, okay, no, you can't screen 40 yards of space. In fact, you're diving in a little too much and you're leaving us more open.
Right.
It's the exact same thing with Rashford, where 2 players were punching well above their weight and perhaps making the team better, but they were covering up certain areas just because of how well they
Yeah.
played.
Yeah.
Now both of their form is off of cliff, and now you got a big problem. So this is, I think those were the issues with the pressing. Having said that, he scrapped that after the Tottenham game anyway. He scrapped that. I haven't seen the high press, the causing turnovers. I haven't seen that since the Tottenham game. Since the Tottenham game, what has occurred is against Arsenal, against Brighton, against Bayern, and against Man City. And this is for the big games. What I'm seeing occur is last season when we did the man-to-man and we're going to block you off in the middle, teams are more aware of the fact that we're going to do that. So managers and opponents don't, managers don't wait. This is elite level competition now. They
Right.
like in-game changes are so important. Managers are so privy now. They'll change things straight away. Managers go, oh, okay, they're doing that. Okay, fine. I'm just going to change this. And then we can manipulate their block, which is exactly what Ange Postecoglou did in the second half. It's exactly what Brighton did in the first half. And it's exactly what Rodri and Stones did in that game, where it was the practice of you're going to man-to-man presses in the middle. What we're going to do is push the centre-backs wider, and that will lure the players in. And so all of a sudden, the block is no longer sticking central. It's like this. It's spread everywhere, so the players are around. So then you can so gaps open, so that leaves space. Whilst we're on the topic of this season and the style of play, so that addresses the big games. Let's address the big elephant in the room, where it's I think this is the hottest topic recently of against Burnley, against Brentford, against Sheffield United, against Fulham to a certain degree. I'm not going to include Luton in this, where Ten Hag said that he has gone pragmatic. And I think it's worth exploring what is going on in these games, why they happened. And maybe you can come in on this as well, because what occurred in those games was United grinded out wins. Look, I think we should applaud that still. We could be sitting here in a crisis, and we couldn't have won 4 and 5, but they did, and this team, I'll give them credit for doing that. But those games that I watched were the practice of they were getting goals because they had better players than the other team. They didn't get goals because of a certain style of play. And against Copenhagen as well, there was particular things that I saw against Copenhagen at home where they won 1-0, where the 3 defenders had it at the back. The midfield, there was 1 midfielder and there was 7 players up, but almost no function and no method of how on earth are we going to get the ball up there.
Yeah.
There's one sequence that I remember seeing where Bruno and McTominay physically run, both of them, up to the attacking line, and Dalot has it in the fullback position. I'm thinking, what is this? What is going on?
Yeah.
I think this is Ten Hag's answer to this is his pragmatic version of I don't have Martinez, I don't have Shaw. So we're going to just hoof it long. We're going to go direct.
Right.
And we're going to try and win aerial duels, and somehow spontaneously we're going to try and score, and we're going to try and keep things tight because my injuries are piling up. But it also could be the fact that against Palace, when they lost 1-0 at Old Trafford, they did try the 3-1-6 and they weren't getting anywhere really. I think there was a few moments maybe there where they could have scored, but they just didn't manipulate Palace's press enough. Now I'm stuck on whether is it that they're this reliant on 2 players in Martinez and Shaw and build up, or have they just had to change their approach so much last season that they just haven't learned the 3-1-6, whereby you can change certain players and bring certain players in, and the function's still going to be the same.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. Because it's it certainly is a challenge in all of this as to how it's what is the reason for it. And I think this is one of the questions I've had for you, because obviously it's really funny. We experienced something very similar last year. In preseason, we played a certain way that was consistent.
Yeah.
Every game. we start the season out, it goes disastrously. And, you start the season out with Martial unfortunately picking up an injury, which should have unfortunately been predicted, and being without a striker. Ronaldo wasn't even present. So, Eriksen starts as false nine in a game, which is a little bit of an odd choice. And, but we get battered, right, against Brighton, Brentford, and it changes and goes back to a certain different style. And then over the season, it kind of progressed, I think. It progressed. I don't think it was the same way that we were playing in preseason, but it was progressing towards that.
He tweaked some things. He definitely changed some things.
Yeah, it was getting there until about the League Cup final, and then for some reason it started to fall apart again, right?
Yes, exactly.
And at the end of the season, I don't even remember how we were playing, but it wasn't it wasn't special. It wasn't
good.
It wasn't good. But then you have the start of the season, kind of a similar thing, where we played a certain way. We played a certain way, like you said, up through about Tottenham.
Yeah.
With Mount, with Bruno, with Casemiro.
Yeah.
And then it starts to change once again. The results aren't we're not getting the results, and it starts to change once again. And go into a bit more of a pragmatic style, where in the last few weeks we're seeing these wins, yes, with Johnny Evans in instead of Varane, where it seems like some profiles are being selected over ability, with McTominay and Eriksen in the team, instead of Mount, instead of Amrabat, who was wanted. You see a difference there, and like you said, I to my terms, I call it, they just kind of decided to skip the midfield, right? Let's just skip it. Let's just skip it entirely. You can see it against Fulham. It was just big switches long to the wingers from the back, and that was it, right? And so you didn't see a lot of patterns, even though you could see patterns, but I should say you don't see a lot of chances created off of these patterns. It's more of get it to these spaces, and then someone's going to do something, and it might work. Yeah, spontaneous. So I guess the question that I would have, that I've had, and where you said you're debating which it is, would we be better off having stuck with something, if there's a long-term way of playing despite injuries, just to stick with it and try to keep making it work? Or do you think that systemically there's a problem with it, and that's why we've gone away from it? Is it just a matter of injuries, or would we be better off today, I guess, if we stuck with it versus going pragmatic? Because what's the long-term view of playing the way we're playing right now?
Have you heard anything as in terms of, did you read anything, or have you spoke to somebody who has had an explanation for those games, or to come out and say yes, it is because of the injuries? Or it must be difficult to answer.
It is difficult to answer because, obviously, yeah. I mean, Ten Hag has called it about the injuries. Ten Hag has said, yeah, it's about injuries. It's and things like that. And I wouldn't say that he's wrong. Certainly, we also definitely changed it last year anyway, even without injuries. And it's a mixture of things. I think that one of the problems you have certainly is the pressure at United. And this is, I think, systemic
100%.
through the club
100%.
for everybody. I mean, frankly, last year when Erik ten Hag came in, before Casemiro, before Antony, they should have said, look, this is what we're going to do, and you stick with it. There's no pressure this year. Forget about results. Play the way you want to play, right? Put it in place and play the way you want to play. Let's get players that suit exactly that style, and let's see where we end up, right? And this is what we're talking about when we say, hey, if Paul Mitchell comes in, he's going to say, this is what we want to do. Let's stick with that plan for the next 5 years and make it happen one way or another, right? And make consistent decisions. The targeting went crazy. The results went crazy. And then you end up with Casemiro, who is nothing like Frankie de Jong, who's nothing like Adrian Rabiot. You end up, Antony, sure, he makes sense in terms of what Ten Hag wanted, but you were targeting at one point Marco Arnautovic. It's a mess. It's a whole mess of stuff. And And I think you see that this year, because as it is right now, it's not like Ten Hag is on the verge of being sacked or something like that today. But if the results had continued the way they were continuing, I think he would have been out of a job.
Yes.
And maybe that's right. I mean, no manager can survive. He lost 9 games out of, the starting games. There's a lot of games, right? We lost a lot of games. No manager at United can survive if he kept losing games. If we lose to Fulham, if we lose to, to Brentford, if we lost 3 or 4 of those games that we won, no manager survives that. So there's always a balance of pressure and having to go pragmatic. And I think that that's a part of it is we end up in these cycles where we want to do something, but it's not working quick enough. So then the pressure builds. So you go away from it. And every year, restarting, back and forth. And we see it with the managers. So the squad is some Jose players that are totally different to Ole players, who are totally different to Ten Hag players, who are totally different to, well, not that different, but in some ways different to Luis van Gaal players from years and years ago, because there's a few still kicking about. Not many, but a few. And and it's, and it is kind of amazing when you see that. And so, I think, injuries are a big factor in why it's changed. And I think that obviously the pressure to get some results now to stay in position is a big factor in that too. So I guess my question would be then, based on what you saw earlier in the year, or even based on what you're seeing now, what would is it possible? Luke Shaw's coming back after the break. Okay, let's put it that way. Luke Shaw's coming back after the break. Sandro Martinez is going to be back for a while, and honestly, there's concerns because
till after Christmas. I think
he's going to be
after.
and it'll be what, 10 months, 9 months since he's been healthy. Then a foot injury that didn't heal properly after one surgery is a bad sign. I'm not trying to make long-term implications, but foot injuries are weird. Foot injuries can be very strange because there's so many tiny little bones and things in there that we'll see how he is when he comes back. When he played to start the season, he was not himself. That was one of the reasons I think they were struggling too. He was totally not himself. He was not very aggressive. He was not doing the cleanup the way that he used to before, where, you talk about those big gaps, right? Casemiro covering 40 yards of space. Well, Martinez would help, would get in there and close some of those gaps.
Either Casemiro, Varane, or Martinez.
Yeah.
It was like, just don't worry about it.
He wasn't doing it. Yeah, he wasn't doing it to start the year. He was struggling. His passing was not so great. There's obviously a lack of confidence. Well, 9 months on, 2 surgeries, how confident is he going to be? When will he get back to himself? He's young, so I think at some point he will, but it might be months, might be 3 months, might be 6 months. You see players when they come back from ACL injuries, it could take a year before they're really themselves again, because of just there's a mental aspect on top of physical and all of that. But Luke Shaw comes back after the break. Okay, you've got who you've got. Wan-Bissaka you've got back, which I think actually helps a lot in balancing those fullbacks to some respect. In covering transitions, I think was one of the reasons, against Fulham, being able to shut down one side of the pitch essentially in transition helps. But you've got that. You still have everybody in your midfield. Amrabat, you don't have Eriksen now, okay, so you're not going to do that. But you have Amrabat, who is supposed to be Casemiro's backup. You have Mason Mount as your big signing. You have Bruno Fernandes. You have in your front line most everybody there except Jadon Sancho. What do you do now? I mean, what do you do now to move forward with how we've been playing? What do you think is the right avenue?
I mean, if we go off the last 2 games, I think it has actually been largely positive. I know, obviously, the Copenhagen game just ended up being a complete travesty. And we all know how that game happened. And, Man United losing is still big news everywhere. But in terms of in terms of what I think is going to happen going forward, and there's still issues with this that I see. The last 2 games have been better. They have been more patient in build-up, especially against Copenhagen. The fullbacks were a lot more brave. But what I saw against Copenhagen that was encouraging, and what I read before the game, I remember Ten Hag said, I want my team to dictate the game tonight. And it's exactly
Mm-hmm.
what they did for the first 40 minutes. There were certain sections that I saw where Copenhagen pressed up the pitch. I think maybe they pressed Dalot's side, and Bruno or Eriksson would be the short option there. I think sometimes that's what United lack. That short option to, okay, don't go long and don't rush the pass. Play it short, keep the move ticking. And the fullbacks being brave was a big thing in that as well. The Luton win, look, they created 8 or 9 chances.
Yeah.
Like 8 or 9 good, clear-cut chances through various different ways. Højlund was getting in the right space. Rashford was creating enough space as well. I know he's completely short of confidence, but the two lineups that I saw against Copenhagen and Luton, I know people keep asking why McTominay is in the team. I think he's trying to go for what he did last season, where a team that was playing the same, and then he eventually found some balance. I know there was little tweaks, and Wan-Bissaka would come in at fullback when Luke Shaw was injured, and I think Lindelof played a large sections of the end of that season. But I think the reason why he's playing Eriksson and McTominay now, and Rashford and Garnacho and Fernandes and Højlund, is because he wants that continuity. He wants to see the same each time. In terms of the style of play going forward, I expect to see the same against Everton. I would expect Man United to dictate that game. I would expect McTominay and Eriksson to play. The problem that I see with that pivot is, okay, McTominay is in because he's red hot goal scoring wise. I think he's the top scorer, right?
Right, and Eriksson now has an injury, of course. By the way,
oh my God, yeah, wonderful, excellent.
Can Mount do the same job, or are we going to see like Amrabat, McTominay?
It'll probably be Amrabat. We can get onto the whole Mount situation and why that isn't happening.
Yeah.
I reckon there's something else going on there, but I expect against Everton they will do the same. They will try and dictate the game. They will try to have the ball in possession. They will try to move Sean Dyche's 4-5-1, 4-4-2 block around. They will try to create spaces wide, and that's a good thing. I think they will do that. Just the problem with having, I personally see, the problem with having McTominay in, and I know why you're having him in right now, because the team's lacking goals and he's scoring. The amount of times he will receive the ball from defense and then instantly give it back, rather than turning and playing it wide or playing it through the lines to Bruno, right, is quite a detriment, I feel.
Right.
And last season, the pivot, the point of the pivot last season was, okay, you have Casemiro, who he surprised us last season. He was a little bit better at the distribution than what we thought. Obviously, when he's on form, he's one of the best in the world at just the defending, the blocking, the tackling and stuff. This season, again, let's not talk, because he's gone off a cliff in terms of his distribution. But the point of last season was you have Cash, you have Eriksson. This season, it's okay, Eriksson can't probably last 90 minutes. We have Mount. We haven't seen Mount in there anywhere near the amount that we should, especially when he's been the marquee signing and he's pushed to get him for preseason. But in terms of going forward for the two games against Everton and Galatasaray, I would expect to see that. I would expect to see the Man United dictating the ball. In terms of the rest of the fixtures in December, Newcastle, Chelsea, Bayern, Liverpool, I think we maybe see the transitions again. Maybe we see the transitions again, depending on who's in the pivot. It'll be Amrabat. Could we shed some light on Mount and what we think is going on there? Again, is it that he's looking for continuity and he wants the same team and he wants the team to function the same way?
Well, there's a couple of things that I was told on this that I think are worth mentioning. Some of it makes sense and some of it doesn't. And I will say, I've just wanted to look up something on that. Some of it adds up and sometimes it doesn't all make sense, but you don't always have the whole picture. With regards to Mason Mount, there's an interesting thing here, because after he came back from injury, He came on and started a couple of games.
Yeah,
Palace and Brentford, right?
Tottenham.
Yeah,
Was
yeah.
it, sorry, Tottenham was before the injury.
Yeah, yeah, and I think he was actually quite good in that game. And then he got injured. He came back. He played against Palace in the loss, and he played against Brentford. He also played in as a substitute. No, he played the first half against Crystal Palace, and was quite good. Had a great game. That 3-0 win in the cup game. That was his first game back. He played one half, had an assist. I think was a fantastic game. It was very Ten Hag ball-esque, that game. It was kind of, you could see the plan,
which is what we want to
right?
see. Which is what we want to see.
I think it was like our one clearest win this whole season.
Yes.
You know, that was what we wanted to see. Mount was incredible. He was everywhere. Great assists. Played the half. Came off. Game was pretty much put to bed, and that was that. And then he was ready to start. He played 77 minutes against Palace in the loss, but then he played 63 minutes in the win against Brentford. Now that was a very, very late. That was a very late win, but what I was told from that point on is that McTominay had to play because he was playing well, but I think Mason Mount was one of our better players in that game, even though we were losing up until that point. I recall he was actually very good, and he'd been good in prior games and all of that. And you get that was being told. There's potentially some other funny things with regards to stuff behind the scenes. You've obviously had, I think, one of the problems you're having right now, as I see it, is there's definitely a bit of a breakdown and understanding at the club between the players and a manager, where all the ideas are not totally being understood one way or another. And sometimes that's a process. You know, Rafael Varane being on the bench, you're seeing stories about he was okay with it, not quite okay with it, understands, doesn't. It's not all good. I'll just say that. It's not all good. No matter what's said out there, it's not all good. It is not totally understood by the players, the reason why that's happening. It's not totally understood why Mason Mount isn't playing. There's some conflicting things behind the scenes with regards to that. But I know he was also told that he couldn't play because, or that, you know, specifically that, you know, that Scott McTominay was playing really well, and that's why he couldn't play. But this is where you see a bit of a funny thing, because like you said, McTominay's kind of in form as a goal scorer. For the rest of the game, what you're contributing to the rest of the game, he's never been there, right?
Yes.
Yes. I think he is actually a good player when it comes to those late runs into the box. He's quite exceptional at picking the spots and ball striking ability. He's really good. But you lose, it's a big trade-off, right? You lose that there for everything else. And it's an odd one because Mason Mount can be a good goal scorer too when he's getting in the right positions. He can be a good creator too when he's getting in the right positions. And, you know, he's new to the team but has never really had much of a run in the side, frankly, as a starting player. He got 2 games, injury, 2 games, back to the bench since then. And and so you have to wonder, is it simply down to, which may be part of it, that nobody can score a goal at United, so you have to play McTominay or you don't have a chance at a goal, which brings us back to this point of pressure, right? And the point of the challenges that you're being faced with, because if you keep feeding the ball to Rasmus Højlund like you've been, like some of the chances Rashford was creating for him in the last game, if Rashford keeps getting those positions, if Garnacho keeps getting those positions, you got to think they're going to start scoring at some point, right? And
yes,
and I think that's probably the biggest challenge that Ten Hag is facing now is you're going to create fewer chances for them with McTominay on the pitch, but you have somebody who's scoring goals right now. So what do you do? You know, and that'll be the challenge. Do you think though that Mason Mount fits into the plan based on what you've seen when he's playing?
Yeah. I think he does. I think he would. I mean, the times where he's played in the pivot, the small times that we've seen him, or the times, the flashes that we've seen of Mason Mount have been good. But I really do think it is the continuity factor. He wants to play the same team. He had this at Ajax as well. I spoke to a lot
Yeah.
of Ajax fans. He said, "Yeah, dude, look, he never rotates. Like it's
Yeah.
you're just gonna have to bat it in the hatches." Because Man United benefit a whole lot last year of having the same team and knowing where to be
Yeah.
on the pitch at what time. So, but the other thing is as well, December is, I mean, I don't want to be ominous. If
It's
things
brutal,
don't
isn't
go
it?
the right way, if things don't
Yeah.
go the right way, we might be sitting in January and we might honestly be talking about having a new manager. That's how brutal it
Yeah.
is in December. We have Galatasaray, we have Bayern, we have Liverpool, we have Chelsea. I think even Everton away is a tough game. You
Well, we
could be
haven't
out of
beat
the
a top
Champions League.
9 team, right? We haven't beat a top 9 team away under Ten Hag at
Yeah,
all, I think, right? Like that's the record
no, we
or
have
something
not.
like that. And right now, you know what, Everton are sitting there, you know, they're in
The
14th.
the trouble
So
with that is
go ahead.
that they're definitely informed. They're definitely informed.
Yeah.
I think touching upon another point with this, with December coming up and all the big away games, I feel like there has been a bunch of different issues that he's had to deal with this season,
Yeah.
whilst he still has tried to address the issues that happened last season. But all of it has come together and snowballed. This is kind of what happens at Manchester United. Whether it's positive or negative, it's a very emotional club. I can't remember who
Yeah.
said it. I think it was Adam Kraft on the Athletic. It's a very emotional club. If you have a positive feeling, that'll snowball, and the players will have 55-inch chests and they can do whatever they believe they can, and they think it's Man United and they're going to be back. But if it's sad and if it's negative, and like it has been this year, and I think the off the pitch stuff, by the way, has affected it definitely.
Sure.
The off field issues have they've never stopped since week one, and that's just snowballed. It's gotten worse and worse, and he hasn't addressed the issues of last season, and then he's had to deal with issues this season. And there's a lot of big away games in December for Man United to go to. And 2 weeks ago, we saw the same thing happen again. We saw Man United go away to a big night in Europe. It was all going fine and dandy for 35 minutes, and then we saw a big capitulation.
Yeah.
If we don't see a big away performance in December, or we see 2 or 3 big bad away performances, it's things could get testing. Things could get testing because there's not a player in that Man United team that, and this might feed back into what you said, where the manager is kind of getting through to the players, but kind of not. There comes a time where like the game will be going fine, one bad thing happens, and then it's capitulation and they lose their heads. They need about 15 minutes of somebody to just take the sting out of the game. You know how Man City do when they pass for the sake of passing, but it's like, but that is Man City's version of
Just
control, by
settle
the way.
down. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That is, somebody said to me the other day, "Oh, Pep Guardiola is not a defensive manager." I was like, they are. He is defensive. City's version of being defensive is we're going to keep the ball for 20 minutes and you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
Man United don't really have that, where it's like, just take this thing out of the game a bit. When they went 2-1 down, when games get chaotic, they really, really lack control, and they've lacked control since last season. But just, I think having a little bit of positivity, because I forgot to mention this earlier, but just going back a little bit, and maybe this also explains another reason for the pragmatism or the hoofball, as some of the experts like to call it. So this is against Burnley, Sheffield United, Brentford, where they were going pragmatic. I think it was Lindelof and Dalot at fullback. Now, the positive signs might be that against Luton and Fulham, we've had Wan-Bissaka back. Now, you might say, oh my God, why are you relying everything on Wan-Bissaka? But he knows what the manager wants, and he can carry it out. And you can see on his particular side when he does the whole go wide, let the striker come inward. And we saw it for that Copenhagen goal. That was Wan-Bissaka going wide, Rashford coming in, McTominay with a run. Fullbacks are extremely vital to what Ten Hag wants to do. And having Wan-Bissaka and Dalot on either side of each other is is a very important thing, and if that sticks the way it is, I think it's positive for Ten Hag. But in terms of these away matches, man, it's this is. I think we're really going to see what Ten Hag's made of as a Man United manager. I feel like we say that every
Right.
week, but it's because the media scrutiny is just so high at this club.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think obviously we are at a point where it's not, like I said, it's not like he's under immediate threat, but you know how quickly that can change. You lose 3 big away games, you crash out of the Champions League, you drop, points to Everton, you drop points to Newcastle. You have a Liverpool game coming up. We've had managers be there before in that situation, and sometimes that can be almost the death knell, and I
Yes,
don't think that's the case. I don't want that to be the case at all,
me
actually.
neither. Me neither.
I don't think it suits us to change a manager during the season, frankly, at all. I don't think that. I don't know. I want us to win. I want us to win every game. I think there's still potential there. I think obviously with Ineos coming in, with the changes above, you could see a huge shift in the mentality, in the leadership, in the direction, because part of what I see is that at the end of it, and kind of based on what you said, some of this is the manager and some of this is environment. The environment of United. There is a lack of leadership at the club, and I don't mean the manager, I mean everywhere. And you can imagine the difference to absentee owners, to all of this, to where I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, but for giving an example, that Jim Ratcliffe comes into Carrington and says, listen, we're going to win. We're going to create the best team possible. We're fully behind you in making this happen. We're going to do all this. We've got these plans. These are the wonderful things that we're going to move forward with. And you have Dave Brailsford there watching every day, which I think he might actually be doing, by the way. And I think might actually be doing through the end of the season, looking at it, observing, seeing what's going on, implementing change, not saying on the football pitch himself, but directing to the right people to do it. That you have a director who comes in who's extremely hands-on. There's a team build here that could happen to where the mentality shifts, and it's like, we don't lose our heads. We're not just 11 players who've gotten together to kick this ball around, but we actually have a goal, and we have something stated, and it goes beyond the manager, but as a club, that there's a feeling back there. And you can see it because you look at why United have done so much better at home under Ten Hag to some degree, right? Has been, of course, you can get that feeling from the fans. You can get that emotion from the fans. You can get that single-minded focus from the fans. You saw when they went down to Forest 2-0 in the first, 10 minutes. It's like they didn't lose their heads after that, actually. They came back and said, we're going to win, and there was a focus, a single-mindedness. And you need to see more of that from them. And that extends beyond the pitch. That extends far beyond what happens even on the training ground. It's all around. And I think one of the things that makes it difficult to analyze is that there's still people, right? There's the human factor of all of this. And the emotion can supersede any types of tactics you want to put in play, where you just lose it for 5 minutes and that's it. And the game's gone in that 5 minutes. Everything you work towards is gone in 5 minutes. And that is a different type of discipline and a different type of organization. So, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a big part of what we're going to have to hopefully see. And hopefully they can work through it. I have hopes that a player like Luke Shaw, who I think is actually quite a calming presence in a lot of ways, that someone like him returning, as I know, a leader in the locker room, returning will help with some of these things, help on the pitch, help with putting some calmness, where he's a player who gets on the ball and will actually move with it, not just launch it every time, who has that kind of, I don't know what word you would call it, but who can do that, who's comfortable being on the ball and in possession and can slow things down.
A bit Michael Carrick.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Slows it down. So I have hopes that we'll see some improvement moving forward and all of that. Last main question I wanted to ask you, without getting into, specific names, who should be bought and sold, things like that. But if we want to continue playing a Ten Hag way that may align with how Ineos want to play, may align with sort of a United way that's not Liverpool, but it's a calmness, but also a directness at the same time. Like we have seen a bit of it last year. I think there was a lot of good moments of that type of play where it wasn't Van Gaal in its passing. It wasn't Pep Guardiola. It wasn't all the way, all out in Klopp, but a decent kind of middle ground there. If that's the way we want to move forward, where yes, there's speed and transition, but also a high press, but also some control out the back. What's missing? I know it's a lot, but it's like
I was asking for a lot of things. I was asking for a lot of things. I want transition. I want control. I want high press. I want everything.
I know. Well, it seems like that's what we're trying to do is get all of those.
Yes.
And that's kind of what you want, right? Is Casemiro? Does it? I mean, honestly, does it all come down to having somebody in Casemiro's position who's more like Rodri in the sense of being disciplined, controlling the game, can cover the space, very physical at the same time? I mean, I know that's a unique profile, but is it reliant? Is doing this and accomplishing this reliant on having that player? Do you think, at least?
I think the United need more players. It's been said a lot, but it's true. The United need more players who are technically good on the ball. If you look at the back four of last season, we'll go for last season. Shaw, Martinez, Varane, and Dalot, I believe. Sometimes
it was a split. Yeah,
okay.
A split.
Wan-Bissaka / Dalot. Out of those four players, Varane is probably at best not the best in terms of distribution. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Luke Shaw is good. Martinez is good. Great. Wan-Bissaka, Dalot, okay, they're all right. They're okay. But how much would it help if you could have a defender in there who is good with the ball, who can distribute?
Right.
Then you look at, Casemiro and Eriksen. Okay, Eriksen's good. He can distribute well with the ball. Probably can't do it for 90 minutes, though. Probably can't do it for 90 minutes. Then you go Casemiro. Oh, exceptional. This is last season, by the way. Exceptional with defending, blocking, clearing, positional sense. His positional awareness was amazing last year. Can he distribute with the ball? Sometimes. And then you look at what's happening this season. Maguire, he's back in form. He can distribute well. Evans is okay at it. Lindelof again is kind of okay at it. And then you look at the two ahead of them who are playing right now, McTominay and Eriksen. Again, you still have the problem of Eriksen last season. He probably can't do it for 90 minutes. McTominay, I think we've already said he's too safe. So I think getting a centre-back in who can distribute next to Martinez is key. I'm looking forward to if Martinez comes back and we finally have the whole, because Maguire's found his feet now and like amazing mental resilience. And imagine if we have Martinez and Maguire who can both distribute. But then you need a midfielder to receive, turn, and then play the ball wide or in the centre. Because I hate seeing Bruno come deep for the ball and doing that. He does that because he's sick of waiting for the ball advanced. And it's like, no, Bruno, because when you get it so deep, you're going to snatch the pass and go long. You need a calming presence back there. So I think Casemiro, it looks like he's going to get phased out anyway. And Varane, it might look like he gets phased out as well anyway. So a centre-back would be excellent. And a central defensive midfielder would be excellent. And another thing that would be excellent is if United start scoring more goals.
Right.
I think this is
change the game state too, right?
This is something we briefly touched upon, but and this has happened even in those games where we've played pragmatic, but it's like they've still created chances and they haven't took them. 13 goals is nowhere near acceptable. It's nowhere near acceptable. I think they've conceded this 2 less than Villa, or one less than Tottenham, but they've scored less than Palace, and I think Forest and Forest have scored more than us, and Wolves have scored more than us. 13 goals is nowhere near good enough. I actually think the attack is a bigger problem than the defense, because the defense it can't stop every single chance. And okay, we've spoke about the defense. There's certain issues there, but this attack is incredibly misfiring. You've relied. Last season, the guy who scored 30 goals, is completely short of confidence. It seems like it. So now you need a new answer for that. I want to quickly, if we've got time, briefly talk about December. Because Galatasaray and Everton, if we do the same thing that we did against Luton, and we did the same thing that we did against Copenhagen, against Everton and Galatasaray, and maybe he feels like he can do that now because he has Dalot and Wan-Bissaka, I think they'll be fine. In terms of the away games, I'm intrigued as to what he will do, because he needs to come up with an answer to what these big managers are doing, where it's like, I'm going to manipulate your block midway through the game. And at the moment, it doesn't seem like he has an answer for that. It seems like it seems like in-game changes where he was excellent at them last season. Excellent, second to none. There was a number of games I could name you where we won simply on his changes. So I want to see what happens in those big games, because honestly, not that I almost don't know what to expect. I think it'll be transitions and counter, but I want to see what happens and if he has a different answer to when those big teams play us.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like the adjustments, which is what happened at Brighton. They adjusted to the way we played, which has happened at Tottenham. They adjusted to the way we played. And we've not been able to really adjust properly in game to win, or to break things down outside of, like we saw against Brentford, just throwing on someone and launching it, into the box, and in those heroic efforts. But it's not a sustainable way of winning games either, for sure. So yeah, that makes sense. I think overall a complicated situation. I think, right? It's hard to see a clear answer because you have injuries, you have the mental problems, you have the issues with why are certain players not playing. You have all sorts of things. I think you've touched on a lot of the different types of ways we've tried to play and will potentially see moving forward. I think all of us hope one way or another we can settle on something to move ahead with that will get some results, but that also looks a little bit better, because I don't know that we could all stand, and I don't know that you'll get results this way in the long term either. I don't know that we could be playing this football by February. I don't think the type of football we've been playing the last 2 weeks, we can play through February.
No,
I can't see it. I can't see it working. I think that it's not gonna produce the same results. So it's okay to grind it out for now, but there has to be some type of progression. Like last season after the World Cup, there was a progression forward in the way of playing. We've got to see that again, so that we can still have a good season and still qualify for Champions League and the things that need to happen. Because with new ownership and all that coming in, we got to do all right. We got to make it, until some things can change. It's like just, it doesn't always have to be pretty, but I do think that it's not even sustainable what we've been doing at the moment in terms of getting results. It's going to break at some point, and I think it's hard for players to deal with that type of thing as well.
Let's see what happens in December. I think they need at least one big away performance, because if it's one big away performance, it could be two bad away performances, and then we could be sitting here talking about a very different coach in January. It's a possibility. Exactly. I don't want it to be, but
Well, makes sense. I think a big month to come, and then obviously might dictate some of what happens in January and beyond that. So I think this is as crucial as it gets now, because we're far enough in the season where you can't keep saying it's just the start of the year. It's just the start of the year. I think now things have to happen. So, all right. Well, it was great speaking with you, going through all of this.
My pleasure.
Definitely.
I got a lot off my chest.
Good.
I got a lot off my chest.
Glad. Yeah, I'm glad. All right, great. And obviously for anybody watching this, to make sure to after this video to follow, I will tag you in the post so people can find the account easily and all of that. But I think you do great work in terms of explaining things in a way that's understandable to people, and gives people a lot more insight and into things, and hopefully you can keep producing content for Sky and doing the things you do and all that, because I think it's really, again, one of the reasons I was drawn to it and talking to you is just that it's understandable, and I think that does matter, because things can be so technical that it's like what's the point of even sharing it to the average person like myself?
I actually agree. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that
Yeah.
lovely best man
Of-
speech.
yeah, of course, of course. All right. So thank you all for watching, and we'll talk to you all later.